Hello 90211. Look who I got here at the zoo with me.
In 5.
Hi Chris. Hi George.
1. Well, hello. Chris Sloan here. Filtered 90211 coming at you. Really excited this week. We have another guest this week and a recurring guest. Don Jones, performance coach, who has been my performance coach for many years, got me into cycling and took me to a different level of fitness. And Don is with us this week. And we don't have Tiffany traveling. She's in Saigon.
Hello, Chris. Hello, George. I finally made it to Saigon. Now it's called Kid City.
Where she grew up. And she still calls it Saigon. For many of you, it's Ho Chi Minh City, right? Depending on your philosophy of that. It's either Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. So we'll cut to Tiffany, and we'll see what's going on in Saigon. So we're here in the LA area, but we're going to see what's going on the other side of the world. And why don't we cut quickly right now to a clip of Tiffany on her way or getting ready to go on her trip.
Hi Chris. George. I'm getting ready to go to the airport. My adventure to go to Saigon, where I came from 49 years ago. And this is my first time going back.
And then a quick clip of her where she's just arrived in Saigon. So let's do that.
Good day. Here I am at the temple, one of the largest ones in Saigon. It's called Temple Big Mian. And they are having a ceremony inside. That's why you can hear all these chanting.
George, that's your cue. Let's do that right now.
And this is the pond. It's pretty. Look at all the goldfish. I like this temple a lot because I used to live near here. And before I left Vietnam in 1975, I snuck out and came here by myself and just sit here and meditate. And this way I got back a lot of memory. I'm inside the temple, therefore I have to whisper. Here it is. Once I came here by myself as an 11 years old child, and I just sat here and I meditate for peace.
Alrighty. We'll cut back to Tiffany. She has some
Hello
really...
90211. Here I am at the zoo in Saigon. Behind me are these cutest elephants. You can imagine there's 3 of them. This is a family of elephants.
She's at a temple. She's at the zoo. She's trying on the Queen's dress, which it's like a copy of the Queen's dress. Some really exciting things there. So we'll get back to Tiffany, but we have Don Jones, performance coach. And Don, we are just fresh off the completion last week of the Tour de France. The Olympics started this past weekend. So there's a lot of international events going on. And then, of course, the Vuelta a España, the Tour of Spain coming up for pro cycling. But, you know, I wanted to talk this week about the Tour de France. It just finished. And I think we had some milestones that are worth talking about. And I think even if you're not a cycling fan, many of you know what the Tour de France is. And there's been many well-known personalities that we know of that have won that event. And the U.S. has, over the years, has had some interesting scenarios happen at the Tour. But in recent years, not so much. But what I've seen in the last few years has, it's making me wonder, Don, what are your thoughts about what's going on the last few years at the Tour? And what I mean by that is record speeds, records being broken, times and stages, just incredible feats of human, I don't know what you call it. I mean, just what the human body can do, but it's going to lead us to some subject matter on that. So what are your thoughts about the Tour this year?
Hey, Chris. How's it going out there in California?
Hello 90211. Look who I have here, the most popular spot.
You know, I'll tell you what. I'm glad you asked me that. It's finally cooled down a little bit. It's been well over 100 degrees every day. Very warm, which it could be.
Yep, you
But
live in the desert.
yes, it's the desert, but it's been really hot. And the great thing about when it's really hot is I have Celsius, chilled Celsius, which cools me down. And it tastes so good. I'm drinking today the kiwi guava, and it has
Sounds
essential energy.
delicious.
It's refreshing. It has essential energy. It accelerates metabolism and burns body fat, and I'm all about all of that. And when I drink it, I feel like this rush goes through my body of just magic, electric. Like I could take on the world. I could ride at the Tour de France when I'm drinking Celsius.
Celsius. Delicious. All
And
right, I
we're
like
also
Tour de France yellow.
co-sponsored by Wheaties today. So we have Wheaties behind you. And who is that on the box?
Oh, that's my son when he was just a wee lad and playing soccer. He's much bigger now, but yeah, I like to keep that box around. He's a champion, just like you.
So let's talk cycling, Don. Let's talk the Tour de France.
Sure. If you
okay,
could,
so here's what happened for many of you that are not cycling fans. So a cyclist from Slovenia by the name of Tadej Pogačar just won his third Tour de France championship in 5 years. And I would say in my opinion, I've been involved in cycling and watching pro cycling for about 15, 16 years now. And that had been the most dominating Tour de France I have seen yet. Now, I'm only starting from when I got into it in 2009. There's been many epic performances, but I'm just talking my timelines. Just the most dominating. And in this type of sport, we're talking about 3 weeks, thousands of miles on a bike going over mountains that we could only think about riding over. I mean, even in a car, it's exhausting. But I think what I saw this year was just this output of power that I've never quite seen before. And it was an exciting tour, but, it makes you wonder, like, how far can we push the human body? How far can technology take us? And is it truly technology in the human body, or are we talking about other things going on here to get our performance to another level? And it could be philosophical, scientific. I don't know. It could be opinionated, subjective. But my thought is I was a bit shocked that a cyclist was this dominating. I think he won 6 stages.
This year's edition of the Tour de France, yes, Tadej Pogačar ended up winning 6 stages. And like you said, it's the third time he's won the entire event in the last 5 years. And the other 2 years were won by the cyclist who came in second place today. So in the last 5 years, Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogačar have taken first or second place themselves in the last 5 editions of the Tour de France. This is going back to around the COVID time. And I guess it begs the question, there's always been a question about doping in cycling. And there's good reason for that, since some sort of doping in cycling goes all the way back to the very, very beginning, over 100 years ago, when a newspaper in France, in Paris, France, that was of a particular political slant, found themselves in a position where the political party that they did not support came to power, and their subscribership was dwindling, and they needed to find a way to sell more newspapers. And so the owners of the newspaper created this almost impossible bike race across France, where some of the days took 12 to 15 hours on the bike, and these were old, crude metal bicycles with no gears. And they sent these men on this incredible journey across France so that they could sell newspapers, telling the public about their progress. Because, of course, in 1900, there were no televisions or radios. That was the only way people could find things out. So, and it was a smashing success. And we've had the Tour de France with us ever since. So again, in the early parts of the 19th century, they took strychnine and drank beer and smoked cigarettes and did cocaine and whatever's been available to a cyclist over the years to help deaden the pain of their legs or to help them get over those big mountains. It's always been something. And is there any reason for us to believe that it's not different today, Chris?
I think that's the question. I started asking myself this more and more the last 2 years. I think ever since we had a major crackdown about 10 years ago, cycling seemed like it was changing. I would say getting normal, if that makes sense, where the speeds were, the expected speeds of a pro cyclist, and it was pretty close to a point. It wasn't as exciting, but it was close, meaning it seemed realistic until the last couple of years.
There's a couple of key moments in cycling history. One is Greg LeMond, the American, which a lot of people have heard of. And he won the Tour de France back in the, I guess it was the mid-'80s, late '90s, early '90s. And some people would say that he was the last non-doped cyclist to win the Tour de France. And there's some pretty compelling evidence that would show that's true. His performance was measured at a certain level. And since that time, the performance has gone up and up and up and clearly hit a high water mark in about 1999 or the year 2000 with Marco Pantani, when he sort of set the benchmark numbers for cycling that until, surprisingly, this year, those numbers have never been met again. And that's when the Festina affair and doping in cycling blew up in the year 2000, and it became a big scandal. The police were involved, and cycling teams were actually they had the possibility of being arrested and being put in jail for doping in cycling. So you really saw it really dip after 2000, but sure enough, it's just steadily gotten better and better. So the question is, there doping in cycling today? My opinion, there is today. There has been all along, maybe with a very, very brief respite in that period around 2000 when there was a big crackdown by the police. So that would be my opinion, that yes, there still is. But the question is it all bad?
Well, that's the question, because it depends on the person listening. If your goal is to create publicity, and we're talking about the history of the tour, and you talked about 100 years ago, and there was a goal that they needed to sell newspapers. They needed to create an audience, if you will. I think all professional sports, again, is entertainment. You need an audience. You sell, sponsorships and commercials and whatever. So it's business, right? So the question is, how do you keep it going? How do you keep it exciting? And like any other sport, if it gets boring, you're going to lose money. You mentioned Greg LeMond, the breakout American in cycling back in the 80s. And what's interesting about Greg LeMond is he was looking at technology in some ways to get better. He was the one that brought in the aero bar to cycling, and the aero bar is this special handlebar for those of you that may not be aware of the equipment in pro cycling or any kind of cycling. And it's a bar that just gets you, it allows you to be a little bit lower on the bike, like an arrow, if you will. Okay. And be more aerodynamic, right? And the more, like a car, the more aerodynamic, cuts through the wind and you're faster.
Sure. Just like putting your hand out the window in the car, you put your hand like this, feel a lot of pressure, you put your hand like this, and you cut right through the wind. And in that era, Greg LeMond lowered his handlebars onto his bike, had special bars made, lowered his entire body on the bike, and became much more aerodynamic. And he was able to make an incremental gain over the other bike riders, and he was able to go on and win the Tour de France that year by it was an incredible 6 seconds, I believe it was in the end.
6 to 8 seconds, might have been even 8
Yeah,
seconds, something like
8
that.
seconds. And the guy that he beat, Laurent Figneault, the Frenchman, spent the rest of his life regretting that. And that's 8 seconds over 3 weeks of racing. Hundreds of hours in the saddle where they add up how long it took you to get from A to B every day for 3 weeks. They keep adding that time up and adding it up. And in the end, the person with the lowest time wins. And Greg LeMond beat him on the last day by 8 seconds. Poor guy said he used to take out the garbage in the morning and count to 8 and just forever regretted those 8 seconds he felt like he could have gotten back. His name could have been in history as the winner and not the guy that got beat that year. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers that we're talking about. So people have been able to quantify cycling performance this way. They call it watts per kilogram, which means how much power you can push through the pedals with your legs, kind of divided by how much you weigh. So they can measure your time. Let's say you're going to climb a very steep mountain, and the mountain is 1 mile long, and you weigh 100 pounds, and it takes you 1 minute to get there. There's going to be a number there, and they're going to be able to calculate watts per kilo, how much power you're outputting on the bike, and for how long you can sustain that effort. So looking back at the Greg LeMond era, which we all can agree was when cycling really took over. I'm sorry, when doping really took over cycling. His number was 5.7. 5.7 watts per kilo was a number that he was assigned for his best efforts. And since then, that number has steadily gone up. And with Marco Pantani, that number was about 6.4. And with Lance Armstrong, his greatest performance was a 6.9. Now, we know that these two men were absolutely doped to the hilt. They were taking the strongest performance-enhancing drugs, and they were putting forth the greatest performances ever that were obviously opening eyes around the world. And after that, everything's kind of been judged by those numbers since. So, which makes Tadej Pogacar's performance in this last tour a little suspect.
Do we have his number as far as where he ranks with 6.5 to 6.9? I'm just curious of that number, but it was going to lead me to, what we're talking 8 seconds when Greg LeMond won. What was the time split between first and second this year in the Tour de France? Now, of course, this is well over 30 years, but you would think with the big crackdown on drugs and performance enhancing and doping, you would think that maybe it would go lower, but it didn't.
Well, I use a great website called the Lanterne Rouge, and you can look them up on your web browser. And this the person who writes for this site is very, very adept at measuring performances. And the title of his article this year is "The Greatest Climbing Performance of All Time, Tour de France, Tadej Pogacar, Stage 15." And for the first time since that doping era, those numbers have been crushed. So Toddy was putting out numbers that were higher than Lance Armstrong and higher than Marco Pantani. Like you said, he won 6 stages, and he did it over and over again, and this time with a headwind. So, for instance, he beat Marco Pantani's record from 1998 by 3 minutes and 44 seconds. And he did so in worse conditions than were done back then. He actually had a headwind. So it begs the question, well, that was 1998. This is 2024. Certainly it must be the advances in the materials the bikes are made out of, how much better the bicycles are, how much better nutrition is for the athletes, and how much better their training are. So you have to ask yourself, is that enough to make up for this much of a performance increase over all that time. What do you think, Chris? Can a better bicycle and eating better help a guy like Tadej Pogačar crush virtually every climbing record that was ever set in 1 year?
Here's my take on it, Don. Probably not. I would say that, yes, the equipment is better. The bikes are lighter. They're carbon fiber now. They're not aluminum. Every component of the bike is designed specifically for speed. So that will pick up probably some seconds, maybe up to a minute. The dieting is better. Nutrition, I think the sports teams and the athletes themselves take it more serious. Maybe you add on a few more seconds to that. But we're not talking about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, are we? We're talking more than that. We're talking numbers that never thought would happen with the crackdowns, right? So we're talking about the same stage. Is that what we're talking about? That Marco Pantani had in 98 versus stage 15 this year with Tadej Pogačar.
Right.
And he just blew the number away.
Right. They measure the performance on certain mountains that they've been climbing up and down in the Tour de France since the very beginning. As they move around France, they become pretty commonplace. And this one was probably going to destroy it here. The Plateau de Belle on Sunday is a very famous climb. They've been up a dozen times in the Tour. So they've been able to measure, they can measure performance on that mountain. My highest numbers ever, says Tadej Pogačar, who isn't afraid of losing the Tour de France yellow. He himself says that he's setting the best times of his life as well. He says he feels great and his legs are great. And his performance, obviously, is what we might call very eye-opening. When he wins, when he beats someone else's record by 2 or 3 minutes, and when the next guy comes up the mountain 2 or 3 minutes later behind him, it makes you wonder about what's the limit of human potential. How much can you really push out of the human body? It's a little eye-opening. Did you ride this week, Chris?
I'm actually going to be riding later today. And so I haven't rode yet this weekend. How about you?
Yes, I rode a couple times this week. Do you think if you ate a great diet and trained as hard as you could and had the best bicycle that money could buy, how much do you think you could improve your performance over, say, a year?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Now, I'm not a professional, but just to see incremental growth. I've seen where I've been able to add, or subtract a minute off of time. And that's all in. That's getting a professional racing bike. That's diet.
Right.
That's training, where I've been able to, because I track my segments on an app called Strava, which we all know. It's a well-known app. It's kind of the Facebook of endurance sports, where you track your times and you share it with everybody. And, so you have this app that tracks your historic numbers. And, I would say, to answer your question, I've been able to, increase my speed and my wattage and shave off, maybe a minute in certain stages at best. Right.
Right.
But
you're talking about the app Strava, which everybody uses, and they use that around the world. In fact, Tadej Pogačar is now has the most number of followers on Strava. Kind of like having an Instagram account. He has over 700,000 followers on Strava. And what Strava does is they'll take a mountain and they'll break it down into what they call segments, little sections of the mountain. And then if you're a bike rider like you can become assigned the king of the mountain. Anybody in the world can that has a Strava app on their phone, if they can beat that little section, then their name goes to the top of the leaderboard as the king of the mountain. Would you like to know how many King of the Mountain records Tadej Pogačar set on Strava this year at the Tour de France?
Well, I'd be guessing, but I think it's a lot. The number's a lot.
288. So Strava actually flagged him, because as a Strava member in the Strava community, if you see a performance that looks unusual, It looks like it's not right. Like maybe the guy was on a motorcycle, or maybe he was in his car pretending he was riding his bike. Then you can actually flag that stage and say, nope, I'm calling bullshit on this one. That can't be right. So Tadej Pogačar is famously known for saying flaggers are haters. You know, I'm not doing my job if there's a lot of haters out there. So he's been flagged, and this year was pretty amazing that he pretty much destroyed every single record set by any other rider on every section of all these mountains for the entire tour. Pretty awesome stuff.
Well, Don, I happen to be following Tadej Pogačar as well on Strava, and I'm looking at his final stage in the time trial in the Tour de France that ends in Nice. And I don't know if you could read it, but that's Tadej Pogačar there. Okay.
Yep.
And so on the final time trial stage, it was a little over 20 miles. He averaged 27.6 miles an hour. And it was a climbing time trial. There was some hill to it. His fastest speed on this time trial was 60 miles an hour. And he did it in a little over 45 minutes. He averaged 99 RPM. So it's not giving me the wattage. What's interesting is they wear heart monitors, right? So all cyclists wear this little thing around their chest, and they're tracking their heart rate during the race on a computer on their bike. What's interesting is he doesn't show his wattage on his Strava.
He doesn't show his heart rate or any of his physiological information.
He's not showing his heart rate. He's not showing any of that. All he's showing is the speed, the cadence, the elevation gain. He's not showing his heart rate or his wattage, which I find interesting. Most pro cyclists do publish that. Now,
Right.
They may not be now more because it's competitive and they don't want each other to know what's going on this app. So that's a possibility, but I follow many pro cyclists that show that stuff, and he's not showing it. If I go to another stage, let's see if I can go to, I'm just going to pick one. I'm going to pick another stage or an activity of his to see if this is a trend. So let's see here. July 20th was the stage before that. It was 80 some miles. This was a killer stage with lots of climbing. Had almost 15,000 feet in elevation gain. He
Right.
averaged 20 miles an hour.
Right.
And he's not
The
showing any
penultimate
of his
stage.
telemetry.
That penultimate stage was meant to really break the rider's legs. It was an impossibly hard stage to end just before the last stage of the tour. And it's very telling if you want to go back and just watch the last couple of minutes of the race. You'll see Tadej Pogačar come across the line, arms in the air, big smile, just seems to be having the time of his life. And then you look at Jonas Vingegaard come across the line behind him, completely destroyed, covered in sweat, almost unable to stand from the amount of effort that he put in to ride those bikes. These guys put in an incredible amount of effort. They're riding on the limit as hard as they can, and unfortunately, none of them can even come close to Tadej, the phenom Pogačar, who was the first rider in over 50 years to hold all three jerseys at the same time. He was the best young rider. He won the competition overall, and he also was the king of the mountains. That happened a couple of years ago. He truly is a phenomenal kid from Slovenia. Sometimes you think maybe he's winning a little too much.
On that note, we're going to break away quick to Tiffany, and we're going to pick that conversation up, Don. But Tiffany, in Saigon.
Filter 90211. This is Tiffany Rothman. I am in Vũng Tàu now. I'm in front of this lovely garden restaurant. And it's across from the beach, and we're having a lot of fun here. Hope all is
On
well.
her trip on the other side of the world, where she is going to be at a zoo, and she's trying on a copy of the Queen's dress, and she's at a temple. So George, why don't we
Can't wait to see it.
why don't we bring Tiffany in and share with us some of those excursions?
I stopped by this Buddhist temple and look at it. Look how tall it is.
close up of this Buddha. This is the children Buddha. I guess he could be like another Santa Claus of the East. This is the step.
Boy, that's some great stuff, Tiffany. I love elephants. I love animals. Deer. I love deer.
We have a bunch of deer. Like
And the temple is pretty interesting. Dawn is big into meditation.
look at all these.
Dawn, you've been trying to coach me on meditation. I'm not there yet. I have not been able to embrace it the way I need to. You know, we talk about how to empower ourselves and make our lives better through nutrition.
Hi, this is our meal for late breakfast, early lunch by the beach. Oh, this is hot. We ordered very, very special rice. Doesn't it look good?
Meditation, spirituality, family. But I have yet to embrace the true meditation. But before we
There's a lot going on up there with you, Chris. A lot of activity up there in your head.
If you only knew what's going on in my brain, you'd be afraid.
Yeah, we're going inside the temple. See? Look at this. The wooden doors, the detail is just absolutely delightful. These doors.
Yeah, I don't even know what's going on, Don. But no, I want to get back to what we were talking about, and I'm just going to come out with it, Don. What's going on with pro cycling and doping? Is it bigger than ever now? Like, we don't really know what it is yet,
right?
Based on the drugs of the past. But what's going on? The question is there doping?
That's the big question. It's a split decision. But let me ask you this: why? No one's getting caught doping, but that's what you think. In the pro ranks, in the last several years, only one rider has been sanctioned for doping, and that was a guy by the name of Nairo Quintana, an amazing racer from Colombia, I believe. Had actually won the Giro, came in on the podium in the Tour de France in the last 10 years, an incredible rider, and he was given a 2-year suspension for tramadol. If anybody wants to know what tramadol is, you can always Google it, but basically it's a painkiller. So why would a cyclist take a painkiller when I think we can all agree that taking painkillers is going to make you sleepy at best? It's going to make your muscles very relaxed. It's not exactly a performance-enhancing drug, but he's the only rider in the professional ranks to have suffered any sort of a penalty for what they call doping. And of course, the UCI and the WADA are the governing bodies of cycling, and they decide what you can and cannot put in your body. So when you get caught through blood testing or urine testing, whatever it is, and you get caught with a certain substance in your body, then you're going to be punished for it. We just don't hear about it much anymore. Some people would say it's a matter of don't ask, don't tell. The cycling sport is much more exciting. It's more competitive, and people want to see athletes that are performing at their absolute best. If these bike races with 180 guys were simply 180 guys riding down the road together, and nobody could get ahead of anybody else, then you know what's going to happen. These riders already don't make very much money as it is, and certainly advertising revenues and TV revenues in the United States are extremely low. They're much higher worldwide, but they're low-paid athletes, and they don't draw a lot of money for their advertising space. So there's unfortunately a good reason why the organizer would want to downplay any kind of doping, and I think that's what's happening now. I think ever since the pandemic, there's been a tremendous decrease in testing. I think they use that as an excuse to not test the riders as much. So let's take a look at, here's an example right now of a couple of riders that are in, let's call it the minor leagues of cycling, maybe just below the pro level, the continental level. And there's two people here, Booth Toon Aerts and Sherry Bossert, which I'm sure I'm destroying their names, but as you can tell, cycling is definitely a very European sport. And in the past 2 years, they've each been caught through a drug test with a drug called letrozole in their system. Both of them were caught individually in Normandy, France, at separate times. This drug is indicated for, as sad as this is, breast cancer. And you're asking, what is this doing in their system? Each one of these riders have publicly claimed they stubbornly refuse any, and they take no accountability for that being in their system. They say, I don't know where it came from. I don't know what happened. And both of them have decided to blame drinking milk in that area as getting a breast cancer drug, which is a very new drug, into their system through drinking milk from the area. Chris, I think this is absolutely absurd. There's a statement here from a professional who's a dairy farmer, and he just explains that why on earth would any dairy farmer in Normandy spend an incredible amount of money to give his cows a breast cancer drug? Why would that ever happen, and why are they stubbornly denying that, and why are they trying to blame milk as a way for them getting caught? And I think it just shows a pattern of cyclists being caught doping and just deny, just like Lance Armstrong did all the way through his entire career until he finally broke down and told the world the truth on the Oprah show. It's just deny. Keep it under wraps, and I think the governing bodies are okay with it. I think it's a don't ask, don't tell. Do your doping in your own spare time and don't get caught. And that's where they want it to be, Chris. Do you think there's any other way that these guys could perform at this level without something to boost their performance?
No, I believe at any level of endurance sports, you have to use something, whether it's legal or illegal. Okay. So an example is being an amateur cyclist myself. I did research. How could I increase endurance? How could I lower lactic acid levels and increase red blood cells? Well, I use supplements that are legal. They're over the counter, or even vegetables. Like red beets will increase red blood cells. Folic acid you can buy at a nutrition store, right? Increases red blood cells. And then there's other things you could take to decrease lactic acid. You must do stuff like that to not only endure, but increase speeds and reduce time. As you get into a competitive level, there's more at risk, as you said, Don. I mean, people are doing this for a living. They don't make a lot of money to begin with in many of these sports. It's unlike the major sports. So you may need to do this just to have a job, just to earn what we call a living. In professional cycling, the average, journeyman or journeywoman cyclist probably doesn't make barely $100,000 a year.
Under $100,000 a year, and the absolute superstars of the sports might make $5 million a year. The absolute superstars at $5 million. And can you compare that to a soccer player, a star soccer player, basketball, baseball, football, cricket around the world? The numbers are staggering compared to what these guys are making, and women. Sorry.
Yeah. And here's what's interesting. When you look at the money that's made in the major sports, it's not even comparable. But yet you still hear about substance abuse. An example is I listen to NFL radio on Sirius XM often. And usually once a month it comes up. They talk about an athlete that either currently has not passed a drug test or recently hasn't, maybe last season, and is coming off of that. I have not heard of any performance-enhancing drug statements in the major pro grand tours in years now, which I find odd because you hear it in the NFL, you hear it in Major League Baseball. Even what happened in Major League Baseball, ironically, in 1998, when Pantani was taking cycling to another level, is when Mark McGwire took baseball to another level with home runs, right? Same year. So even in the major sports, I still hear about substance abuse for performance enhancing use, but I don't hear about it in cycling anymore, which I find odd.
It's that silence. There's an Italian word for it. I think it's omerta. Just silence. Don't say anything, and let's carry on. To go an entire 3 weeks tour coverage, that's you're on the air now for 21 days in a row, and they're on the air. These cycling broadcasts they're 5, 6, 7 hours of broadcasting time from beginning to end every day. To have that much time on TV, and them not to even mention anything about doping for that entire time just shows me that the entire sport is involved in a massive cover-up. They know the doping is there, and they've all agreed together to just stay quiet about it, and let's just enjoy our sport.
Yeah, and it's too quiet. So, with the I think it's so quiet it's loud to me. That's how much it's standing out. We're getting records broken, and it's even more quieter on PEDs, which leads me to believe that it's political. It's deep rooted. There's a reason. I find it hard that, in the grand tours, there's 3 grand tours a year. Don, do you want to explain to everybody what the 3 grand tours are in professional cycling each year?
Sure. Just to give a big overview, in the spring, the cycling season starts in the early spring when it's still cold and wet, and these professionals will race their way through Europe doing one-day races. And then in May, they'll do a 3-week race all over Italy, sometimes venturing into neighboring countries. And again, very similar to the Tour de France, 3 continuous weeks of racing. You must get on the bike every day, and you have to finish every day's race. And they're all over 100 miles long and possibly difficult. The best riders in the world are vying for these very, very sought-after spots on these high-level teams. And you're racing against the best racers in the world. 3 weeks in May at the Tour of Italy, a bit of a break, and you're on to July, where you have 3 weeks of racing in the Tour de France, the highlight of every racer's career. If you rode your bike as a professional for 20 years and you won one of the stages, one of the races in the Tour de France, that would make your career. There's nothing more sought after than winning a stage at the Tour de France. And then a couple of weeks after, we do the same thing in the country of Spain, which is known for even more climbing, more mountain climbing, and very, very hot in Spain. And those are our 3 major tours. And sometimes every 4 years, you have to squeeze in another very premier event, and that's called the Olympics. So the Olympics are happening right now, Chris. In fact, the men's individual and women's individual time trial took place just yesterday. I know it's about a week after the Tour de France. So Tadej Pogačar just got done destroying virtually every record there is in cycling in the Tour de France. Looked pretty fresh to me. Looked pretty happy coming off of that his last stage win. But Tadej decided not to take the trip over, not to stick around in France and show the world that he's the greatest by winning a gold medal in the individual time trial. He did beat the best riders in the world in the time trial on the last stage of the Tour de France this year. He was obviously the best rider in the world, and he says that he decided to skip the Olympics due to fatigue. In fact, if you look down the roster of riders in the Olympics, you're not going to see the same level of racers that are in the Tour de France. And it's only a one-day event. So what do you think the reason is for that, Chris? Why wouldn't Tadej simply stick around, rest up, and go show the world he's the greatest in the individual time trial and take home a gold medal?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I mean, we could probably go to the left or to the right of that. I mean, let's just look at it as an athlete. Is he that in need of recovery? Did he give it so much during those 3 weeks, even though we talked that we didn't see a lot of suffering on his part, but it doesn't mean his body wasn't exhausted. Did he feel that I have nothing to prove? I'm tired. I need to rest. Maybe I'm going to ride the Tour of Spain and I need to recover. Maybe. but the Olympics is once every 4 years. It's a different stage to be on, as we know. And yeah, if you're at your best, as he talked about, he's at his best now, wouldn't it make sense? But he's not a time trialist technically. He's a road racer. I believe the winner, Don, was Remco Evenepoel. Did he win the gold medal?
I did not watch it myself yet, but I think the point I'm trying to make is I believe that Tadej Pogacar did not go to the Olympics and win the gold medal because the doping controls in the Olympics are going to be much, much different than the doping controls that are put forth by the people who organize professional cycling. Frankly, I don't think he could have passed a dope test in the Olympics.
I would agree with you. I think that, again, I was just talking as an athlete, reasons why you wouldn't go, but let's face it, in the Olympics, if you go, they're not the UCI, which governs pro cycling. They're the Olympics, the IOC. Two different committees, two different politics. Probably they don't care who you are as far as other sports, like other governing bodies. You come here, you're going to do it our way, and chances are they're going to do some major drug testing. What do you think?
I hate to be a pessimist, Chris, but I think that's the sole reason Tadej did not go to the Olympics and at least try to bring home a gold medal, which he would certainly have been in contention for, considering how on form he was and what a fantastic performance he put in France. I think he was in a perfect position to go in there and at least try to win a gold medal. And I mean, they're only every 4 years, and a cyclist's career can end literally at any moment, as we've seen many times with cyclists. Just a touch of a wheel, and they will crash their bikes so hard they can end their careers. Chris Froome was on a practice ride. He won the Tour 5 times. In the prime of his career, had a horrible crash and never rode the same way again. Egan Bernal, another fantastic rider in his prime, easily could have won the Tour. Terrible crash. Was never able to compete again. It happens over and over again. So these cyclists, I think they have to live day by day. And I think he missed out on a big opportunity for a gold medal. And I think that's the reason why.
Well, we'll never know now. But they still have the road race part. So that was the time trial. There's a road race as well. And again, I look at him more as a road racer. He's not necessarily known as the time trialist, even though he's one of the best time trialists in the world. Who knows? But is he not partaking, Don, in any Olympics?
No.
Okay.
Nope. Him and many other riders have decided to pass on the Olympics. Many. And there's many cycling events in the Olympics. Many. They have indoor track cycling and cyclocross. They have mountain biking, BMX bikes. It really is a big sport in the Olympics. I hope that our listeners will tune into Peacock, NBC, and watch some of the greatest amateur cyclists in the world going at it in many, many different disciplines. Now, I've been talking a lot about whether or not people are doping in the pro peloton, professional cycling, and I believe they do. But Chris, I also believe that doping, there's a side of doping, I think, that is actually acceptable.
Well, I think it goes on in most major sports, professional sports. I think we see it in other sports as well, where people are failing drug tests. It comes out in the news. Of course, I think there's an acceptable level, meaning they're doing it and they're doing it in a way that it still makes them a better athlete, but it doesn't allow them to climb above everybody else. And it also allows them to still pass drug tests. And that's called cycling. Whatever you do, you cycle it, okay? You go on it, and then you go off it. You go on it, and you go off it. And I think that's been going on in most sports for decades, probably since the evolution of true steroids and any kind of doping. We knew it went on in the Olympics in the 60s and 70s in Europe. So it's still, I think there's an acceptable level of it.
I do. I believe that there's two kinds of doping programs that are used in cycling. I think there's the performance enhancement, which of course was famously was a drug called EPO, something that's worth looking into. It's a drug, I believe it was used for patients that were having trouble with their kidneys. It forces the body to, the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And if your body is enriched with more red blood cells, your body can carry more oxygen, and hence you can perform much better, especially on a bicycle. Marco Pantani, for example, where they measured the red blood cells in his body, and I'll give you, it's a number, we'll say it was as high as 60 was the number for his red blood cells. And the UCI eventually said that 50 was as high as any human being was allowed to be if they tested you for your red blood cells. And a normal human being, you and I, are probably maybe 35, 40, 45. Most humans at the very best are in the mid 40s. So doping back then, they could increase their red blood cell count using anything they wanted as long as they kept it under 50. Again, showing this complacency within the UCI where they would allow you to dope up to a certain level. Which brings me to my point. The other part of doping is in recovery. And this is where I think doping should be allowed on some levels. These men and women, or these endurance athletes, especially in these grand tours where day after day after day they're out there really taxing their bodies and putting everything on the line. At the end of the day now, many of them simply get a massage, try to rehydrate, try to fill their bodies back up with fuel again, and simply rest until the next day. And I think they should be allowed to take certain medications, certain drugs that will help them recover for the next day. Things like small doses of testosterone, cortisol, I believe you call it, like the cortisone shots that you can get when you go to a doctor when you have a bad knee. And like Nairo Quintana, he took a painkiller, something literally to deaden the pain in his body and maybe to help him sleep and get ready for the next day's race. I think if there's a medication or a drug that's on the banned list that can simply help the body recover a bit to be raring to go the next day without increasing red blood cells, or without being like a stimulant, like Marco Pantani's second favorite drug, cocaine, then I think that we should look into allowing some recovery drugs to be used in the grand tours and at all times, in all sports, really. I'm sure in football players, they get injured quite often, and I think you can actually see them getting shots right on the sideline.
All the time. In some pro sports, you're actually allowed to get injections before the game, after a game. Cycling a bit different. They don't even allow you to use certain creams that have steroids in them that would maybe assist in what they call saddle sores. So these riders are on a bike for 5-6 hours a day for 3 weeks, and then you get these sores on your butt, on your ass. You get these sores called saddle sores. Well, there's certain creams that some cyclists have gotten busted for using that help those sores heal, but you're not supposed to use it, right? So in some sports, they allow a doctor to inject you in the locker room, and in cycling, supposedly, you can't use anything.
They really are the poster children of doping around the world. They've probably been scrutinized more in the sport of cycling, I think, than probably all other sports combined. The spotlight's really been on that sport, and I think it's pretty unfair, the extensive list of items they have on that list that you're not allowed to have in your body. Or at least you're not allowed to get caught having in your body. So I still believe that the cyclists have their own doping programs. It simply revolves around not getting caught. Use the drugs you can, just know when and how to use them in moderation at certain times, and just don't get caught.
So as we come up on the hour, Don, it seems like we both agree that doping is still going on in cycling. It's whatever they're using now, we don't know what it is now because it's an undetectable drug, because it's an unidentified drug that maybe they're using that they haven't tagged yet as illegal or banned, like PEO. I'm sorry, EPO. But we believe. Do you agree that they're using something?
I don't think there's any possible way that Tadej Pogačar could break 288 Strava records, win 6 stages, do so looking fresh as a daisy at the end of the day, destroy Marco Pantani's record up a certain mountain climb by almost 3 minutes without having some sort of help through. And I don't think that those improvements can come through aerodynamics on a bike. They're not going that fast up the hills. Stiffness of the bike, the better rolling speed of the tires, nutrition, and better training regimens. I do not think that those are responsible for these types of gains when we've seen what the peak men who were on the highest levels of performance-enhancing drugs, they set the bar. And Toddy has gone up there and he has crushed those numbers. And I think it's only possible to use the exact same kind of programs.
Well, we have the Tour of Spain coming up. It'll be interesting to see what goes on during that 3-week race. And then we still, of course, like you said, have the Olympics. But, you know, I think we're not going to see a lot of those higher-end riders in the Olympics, maybe because of the testing. Who knows? But we'll have to wait and see what goes on in the Tour of Spain, which is the last major Grand Tour of the year. But we've obviously seen some amazing things this year. Granted, as a cycling enthusiast and fan, it's exciting to see, but you know, you want to also talk about what's real and what's not. And we definitely suspect some things going on that are not probably the way they're supposed to be. So who knows? Maybe they'll eventually identify a substance and say no longer. And then maybe we'll see speeds go down again. That's the trend. It goes up. They identify a substance. It becomes banned. They go down. They find something else. They go up. It's human. It's the human element in all of us. We have to just find the next best thing.
Yep. And as much as my beliefs are that doping is prevalent in professional cycling, I still love the sport. I still respect the men and women that do it. I think it's an extreme sport. They push their bodies to the limit, doped or not doped. They still take the risks on those skinny little road bikes out there. One of the few sports we talked about in our last show where the athletes routinely, unfortunately, are killed in the sport. You don't even see as much death in motorsports as you do in professional cycling. It's a dangerous sport. It takes a certain tough character to be able to do well in it. And doped or not, I still have respect for these men and women for how hard they work for very little pay.
Well, before we leave, we're going to cut to Tiffany one more.
Hello there, 90211. Here I am at St. Anthony Catholic Church. It's the largest church in Vietnam, right at Cape St. Jacques. How beautiful it is. All the stained glass.
In Saigon.
Where
and I'm
is
sure
Tiffany
she's
now,
enjoying the food and the sights. So, George, our producer, let's cut to Tiffany one more time.
Good day. I am in front of the law school in Saigon, where my late father was the dean in this school for many, many years. He taught here, and so many others of my relatives. Can't go inside. Change the color. The fans, I remember it used to be darker.
All right. Well, Tiffany, we can't wait to have you back, and we could talk about your trip in depth, and looks really exciting. I don't know if I'll ever get out there, but you never know. One of these days, who knows? Maybe you'll take me.
It looks amazing over there in Vietnam, Chris, and oh, good for Tiffany getting to go back home and see such wonderful things.
Without a doubt. Well, Don Jones, thank you again for stopping in to Filtered 90211, where I think we made a statement. We made our statement.
Thank you for
today.
having me. It was wonderful this afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Well, looking forward to having you again, Don, and maybe after the Olympics is over and the Tour of Spain, as we go into September, we'll have you on again, and maybe when the fall comes around, we'll shift some discussions to meditation and breathing, because without breathing, you cannot live. At least that's what you told me once.
Another amazing discovery by Chris. All right, get out there on your bike, everybody. Have some fun.
Go pedal, everybody. See ya.
Hi, here I am at Caroline Resort in Bordeaux, as the French call it, Cape de Jazz. Look at the pool, isn't it beautiful? There's just a little villa here, they call it Caroline Resort now, and the trees so beautiful.